Sup, bitches? I'm in my dorm room right now, so I apologize in advance if you hear any noises. Can you see the steam coming off of this? This appetizing Amy's mac and cheese. This is like my staple college food. Somebody anonymous on Tumblr requested that I make more Anderperry content. And when you have 22 subscribers and somebody makes a special request of you, you kind of just do it. I wasn't sure if I could make another Anderperry video because the last one I did with Michaela, I kind of said everything that I needed to say and like looked at other stuff. I was like, oh, maybe if I wait for more fanfiction to come out, I can make like a part 2, but I don't really know if I want to do that. And then I remembered that I have my own fanfiction. Granted, none of this is like written and published, and I was going to publish it on AO3, but like I'm not good enough for AO3, I don't think. Like, Archive for me is like the promised land of gay fanfiction, and I'm not ready yet. Also, normally when I take notes for a video, I take it in a little notebook. This time around, we had to bring out the big guns. And, yep, this is all just gay shit. So these are kind of like my own headcanon / fanfic ideas. I have 3. 2 are Anderperry, 1 is Cheeks, so we'll get the Cheeks one out of the way first, since it's also the shortest, I think. So my first fanfic idea is Charlie and Meeks and their lab partners. Now, Charlie and Meeks have never really interacted up until this point. They both have their reputations, Meeks as a lovable nerd, and Charlie as the most obnoxious thing to grace the planet. One day in class, their teacher is giving them a tutorial on how to use a Bunsen burner, and he says something like, this is how you adjust the stopcock, which is kind of like a valve for any of you who don't know or care. So of course, immediately after the teacher says the word stopcock, Charlie leans over towards Meeks and goes, he said stop. Meeks like gives out the most hideous snort of laughter that you've ever heard, and the teacher turns around to question him about it, but Charlie covers it up. Oh, I just realized there was a siren going off. It's Chicago, ah! But Charlie just immediately says Gesundheit in order to cover it up, so they're fine for now. But of course, when they do the actual experiment, Charlie somehow fucks it up, probably with something related to the stopcock, because irony, too busy making sort of dick jokes about it to pay attention. It's just a valve, Charlie, come on. Jesus. The teacher gives them both detention, probably because Charlie nearly burned down the freaking building. And while they're in detention, Meeks is like subtly trying to read a book from under his desk, because that's the kind of guy he is, and I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to do that in detention. And Charlie is following suit, being a true academic, by launching spitballs at Meeks the entire time. At one point, he crumples up a note and tosses it at Meeks, and Meeks opens it and it says, "Will you go on a date with me? Check yes or no." Meeks just crumbles it back up into a ball and tries to toss it at the trash can, but it misses, and the teacher notices and is about to pick it up, and then Charlie dives for it in a flare of dramatics. And you know what our boy Charles Nwanda Dalton does with that piece of paper? That's right. He eats it. The boy can't be tamed. I don't know what to tell you. He of course chokes on it, and Meeks has to give him the Heimlich maneuver because he is so CPR certified. I mean, the Heimlich isn't CPR, but whatever. The teacher lets them out early because he's had enough excitement, they all have, and Charlie and Meeks are walking out together. Charlie makes some comment about how he's always trying to suck the marrow out of life, but he's been told he has a problem with choking on the bone. And Meeks is like, did you just quote Henry David Thoreau at me? Charlie neglects to mention the fact that he was also quoting John Keating because he got too caught up in the fact that Meeks likes poetry and tried to capitalize on this by saying, all good things are wild and free! And he like does a grand jeté across the pavement. It's probably one of the gayest things he's ever done. Besides all that dick eating, of course. Charlie asks Meeks on a date so he can make up for ruining the lab experiment and landing them in detention. And Meeks, as annoyed as he is by everything that Charlie's done today, just has a good feeling about him and says yes. Yay! Next up, Anderperry. The first one that we have is the ice skating fic, and I think this is gonna be like a co-ed AU. So Ginny and Chris, who are of course dating, run up to the dead poets frantically, and they're like, hey, so we were going to invite you like cordially to this anyway, but we were just talking to our friends about going ice skating this weekend, and Cameron overheard and he invited himself, and none of our other friends can go, and we really don't want to hang out with him by ourselves, so we're all forcing you to come. The Dead Poets Society is comprised of absolute gentlemen, so of course they are all down to go. Well, except for Knox, who is coming down with a cold, nursing his unrequited crush on Chris, and Pitts, who is delighted by the invitation, but just has a lot of height and not a lot of idea what to do with it, so, you know, that plus, like, razor-sharp blade shoes and slippery ice just doesn't sound like the best mix. Like, it's very possible that he would kill himself and at least 3 other people. But Charlie and Meeks are down to go, and Neil volunteers both himself and Todd, as he is wont to do. And Todd, of course, in his little Todd way, just kind of shrugs and nods without looking up. Let's be honest, that boy can't say no to Neil Perry. But later, Todd's talking to Neil about it, and he's like, I've never been ice skating before. I know I'd be terrible at it, and I really don't want to make a fool of myself in front of literally everybody we know. All 6 people that we know. So Neil suggests that he and Todd go ice skating up a nearby frozen pond at night, and Todd can sleep over at Neil's conveniently empty house. They go at night, when there aren't any kids around, and they go ice skating, woo! Well, Neil skates by himself for like 10 minutes, partly because he wants to make sure the ice is good before Todd gets on, and partially because Todd's just amping himself up. Eventually, Neil gets tired of waiting and just drags Todd's clumsy ass onto the ice. Todd almost immediately falls over and has to cling to Neil in order to stay upright. Neil's, like, laughing his ass off. And they skate around for a little bit. They at one point do that thing where they're holding hands and, like, facing each other, so Neil's kind of, like, skating backwards and leading Todd forwards. But then Todd trips and falls and flips over and takes Neil down with him. Ah! Neil lands on top of Todd, and they have a super gay moment where they're both just staring at each other and looking at their warm breaths against the cold night air escaping from each other's lips. Neil looks down and he leans down, and his eyes get all half-lidded like he's about to close them, and their noses brush, and then BAM! The ice breaks, 'cause it's drama. The boys fall through the water, and it's not very deep, so they're not in any danger of drowning, but, you know, it's a frozen pond. That water's pretty damn cold. Also, because Todd is, like, beneath Neil in this, his entire body just is completely underwater, and Neil nearly has a heart attack. Neil goes into, like, protective adrenaline mode and yanks Todd out from under the water and, like, shoves him onto dry, snowy land. And Todd, who's still miraculously conscious, pulls Neil out of the water as well. And they schlep themselves back to Neil's conveniently close and empty house. There are 2 bathrooms in the Perry household, and only one of them has a bathtub. And I think in this kind of situation, it's better to be, like, submerged in warm water than to have it just, like, rushing over you. So Neil, of course, insists that Todd take the tub. Todd tries to do a, like, no, you were in the water longer than I was, and Neil is, like, not having it. He's like, bitch, you were fully submerged. Get in the tub. They bathe separately, much to everybody's dismay. Once they're both done in the bathrooms, Neil bundles them up in a lot of sweaters and sweatshirts and sweatpants and socks and such. Neil's pretty upset that this happened, but he is happy to have Todd over, and he's gotta say, Todd looks real cute in his clothes. And Todd's pretty upset that this happened, but he's gotta say, he really likes wearing Neil's clothes. And he makes them some soup and some hot tea, and he sits them both down on the couch, and they listen to the radio or watch, what was out in 1959, The Twilight Zone? Or hell, maybe they just sit there in awkward silence. Who's to say? While they're sitting there, Neil is simultaneously doing everything he can to not look at Todd because he's so ashamed of what happened, and yet also he wants to make sure Todd's okay, so he's doing these, like, quick little side glances. It's, like, really awkward. And at one point, he and Todd lock eyes, and Neil, like, darts his head back down and looks at his lap until he feels a pair of lips brush against his cheek. His head snaps up, and he looks at Todd, and he's like, what was that for? Todd is sitting there like this, like he looks like he hasn't moved. But he looks up at Neil, and he just shrugs and says, thank you for taking me ice skating. Neil is flabbergasted. He's like, but you fell into the pond. I ruined everything. It was my fault. Like, you nearly died of hypothermia. Our boy's dramatic. We all know this. Rather than interrupt him, Todd merely leans forward again and gives Neil a kiss on his other cheek and says, "And that's for getting me out of the pond." At this point, Neil is like more silent than he's ever been in his entire life. And Todd kisses Neil on the forehead and says, "Excuse you, I'm trying to write gay fanfiction right now. Jesus." Todd kisses him on the forehead and says, "That's for taking care of me." And then Todd kisses him right on the lips, and Neil says, "Well, what was that one for?" And Todd says, "Everything before and after tonight." Our boy Todd is anxious, but damn, he's a poetic talker. They kiss again, and they keep on kissing, and needless to say, they warm up a bit. This last one fits in with my outfit today. Don't know if you could see, and it's called "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." I would have sung that with a bit more strength, but I'm in a dorm right now. Dead poets are in New York City. This is a college AU, and I'd say that everybody's at NYU except for Meeks and Pitts, who are at Columbia, and Neil, who's at Juilliard. Yeah, you know, where they go to college isn't important, but it's a detail that I didn't want to skip out on. And yes, they all went to high school together, and they're all living in New York together. It's a fan fiction, let me live. And by the way, this fic is more modern than the other ones. So Neil randomly decides one day that the entire group should go to a baseball game because they're in their senior year and they've been living in New York for almost 4 years now, and none of them have ever been to a baseball game together. And Meeks is like, yeah, there's a reason for that. It's because our gay, nerdy asses have been way too busy going to, like, museums and improv shows, rocking that student discount. They go to a women's baseball game because fuck the patriarchy. Charlie, of course, takes a knee during the national anthem, and all the other poets kind of follow suit. Oh, by the way, sorry, I forgot to mention, it's Neil, Todd, Charlie, Meeks, Pitts, Knox, Ginny, and Chris. All 8 of them are there, and there was no conflicts. You know what, finals are over, and they all have part-time jobs, but none of them had to work today. You know what, shut up. When the actual game begins, the only people interested in it are Ginny and Chris because they just watched A League of Their Own and they are very excited about the baseball lesbians. Knox and Pitts make a game out of jumping out of their seats and cheering wildly every time a home run happens, no matter which team earned it, because they're also excited to be here supporting the baseball lesbians. Pitts also makes a lot of the food and beer runs for everybody because he has the legs of an ostrich and the heart of a saint. He gets Charlie a hot dog, and of course Charlie tries to deep throat it at one point, you know, try to embarrass the shit out of his boyfriend Meeks. Meeks is of course just trying to ignore him, so Charlie leans towards, you know, the shy boys like Knox and Pitts and Todd, and just says, with a mouthful of hot dog, and he whispers this, but way too loud for anybody in a 4-foot radius not to hear, "He's not impressed. He knows firsthand that I've had bigger." And he's leaning away from the girls, but, you know, again, he's loud, so Ginny hears this and she snorts beer out of her nose. Also, Pitts asks Todd like 3 times if he wants anything, and Todd always declines, saying that he already ate before he came to the game. But Todd and Neil live together, and Neil only remembers him having breakfast, and it's like midday, and he's like, surely he's hungry. So of course Neil, the overprotective freak, orders like a plate of super nachos and forces Todd to have like half of them. Todd eventually, very softly, admits that he would like some Cracker Jacks. Neil obsesses over this and thinks it's the cutest thing ever and buys him like 5 bags, but he's a bit biased because he thinks Todd is the cutest thing ever. Everybody has some Cracker Jacks, but they all give like the little prizes to Todd, and one of them's a puzzle. And he's kind of just zoning out playing with one of them until he hears like a sudden roar of laughter from his friends and like some cheering coming from, you know, the other members of the crowd. So Todd looks up and first he looks down at the field and he's like, did something funny happen in the game? Like, what happened? But then he realizes that everybody's looking kind of up and across, and he looks at the Jumbotron, which says, "Wilt thou marry me, Todd?" It suddenly dawns on Todd that this is the sole reason that Neil dragged everybody out here today. Neil gets on one knee and takes both of Todd's hands in his own and asks for his hand in marriage. Todd's brain short circuits. He's kind of having like an out-of-body experience. Once Todd like shakes himself back into reality, he like just stares at Neil and he's like, "Neil, We're already married. Neil barely manages to suppress a smile, and he's just like, will you marry me, Todd? Like he hasn't even heard him. This exchange continues for a hot minute with Neil just saying, will you marry me, Todd? Todd, will you marry me? Will you make me the happiest man alive? And Todd's like, Neil, we had our wedding 1.5 years ago. We went back to the Indian cave in Vermont. Mr. Keating officiated. Charlie was your best man. Meeks was mine. We're still saving up for our honeymoon. We haven't told our parents. Have I told my brother? I should tell my brother. By the end of it, Neil can do absolutely nothing to hold in his laughter. For Todd, Neil's laugh like drowns out everything else that's happening around him until he hears Charlie's devilish cackle. He looks back up and he sees that he and Neil are on the Jumbotron. But then he feels Neil squeeze his hand and he looks down into the most adoring, love-struck pair of warm brown eyes he's ever seen, and the rest of the stadium disappears. And then Neil kisses Todd's hand, and Todd realizes that as embarrassed as he is to have his face plastered on a Jumbotron for an entire stadium to see, that this is just one of the many ways that Neil chooses to show his love for his husband. So Todd relents and says yes. Neil kisses him. The dead poets and the rest of the crowd settle down. Neil sits back in his seat, but he leans over to Todd and says, you know, that's revenge for you proposing to me 2 years ago instead of me proposing to you. And believe it or not, Todd is the one who proposed, with a poem, no less. But all he can think about as he sits there is that he could get used to Neil's particular brand of revenge. So let's root for the gay boys. If they don't fuck, it's a shame. And those are my fanfictions. I hope you enjoyed. I will be happy to produce more Anderperry content if anybody wishes. Because that's my brand now, I guess. Thank you for watching. I love you very much. Carpe that ass. Bye.